High in the clouds, perched on top of a floating mountain, stood a sturdy stone house, weathered by time, yet full of warmth. Its chimney sent wisps of smoke curling into the sky. Inside this house lived a man named Lyon. This was no lonely island drifting aimlessly in the sky. It was one of many floating islands, home to the SkyIslanders, who drifted above the vast sea of Saiva. Some islands drifted high, others low, but all were far, countless miles away from the land of Mansville. The SkyIslanders visited one another often, sharing exotic dishes and exchanging lavish gifts. To travel between islands, they used sea odds, sturdy wooden planks bound by layers of resilient rope. These bridges were lowered from one island's edge to another, linking their floating homes. On major holidays, the SkyIslanders lowered their sea odds, now draped in vibrant ornaments, weaving a dazzling web of bridges across the sky. Far below the floating islands, to the south, lay Mansville. There, a ruthless ruler named Lord Duke, consumed by his hunger for power, wove a grand deception, convincing his people that no life existed beyond Mansville. This lie bound them in servitude for generations. To the Mansvillians, he was more than a leader. He was their only salvation. They worshipped the very ground he walked on. To secure his rule, Lord Duke released a sinister fog known as Veil Mist, drawn from the enchanted mines of Shadowfell. Those who questioned his truth paid the price, with their heads. Years ago, Lyon's grandparents, Becca and Trejune, saw the truth and ran. With a handful of others, they fled Mansville, risking everything. Death chased at their heels, but they escaped, finding refuge in the floating mountains. Joshi, the only child of Becca and Trejune, met and married Nellie, the daughter of the island's renowned blacksmith. They built a life together among the floating mountains, but tragedy struck when Lyon was 15. His father succumbed to heart troubles. 6 months later, his mother followed, claimed by weak lungs and a broken heart. Now, at 28, Lyon had just hosted his 6th party in 4 months. Each one was an attempt to silence the restless ache in his chest, the nagging sense that he was meant for something more. But once the laughter faded and the guests were gone, the feeling always returned. Lyon scraped the last crumbs from the cake tray into the trash and set it in the sink. Then, as always, he sank into his favorite spot, the rocking chair by the window. Beyond the glass, Mansville stretched into the distance, its crowded houses shrouded in darkness. Wisps of thick fog curled through the streets, twisting like ghosts. What if Grandma and Grandpa had never escaped? He would have been down there, just like them, lost. And then, a dangerous thought crept in. "Someone has to tell them the truth," Lyon whispered. Maybe I should go." The word startled him. Any other SkyIslander would call it madness, but for the first time, Lyon didn't think so. A strange calm washed over him. The restless ache in his chest faded, replaced by quiet certainty. That night, he slept peacefully, as if he had answered a call greater than himself. For a week, Lyon planned in secret. Fortunately, his home was low enough that his ladder reached the ground. He wouldn't need anyone's help. He packed only the essentials: food, clothes, and a single photograph of his parents. He told no one, not even his best friends, Booth or Jada. The last thing he needed was doubt. They wouldn't understand. Just before dawn, one day, Lyon set down the ladder. He stared into the vast darkness below, his breath steady, his heart resolute. With one final inhale, he stepped onto the rungs, descending toward the unknown. Lyon tightened his grip on the rope, his lantern casting flickering light against the endless dark. Step by step, he descended, the wooden rungs creaking beneath his weight. His heart pounded, his thoughts racing faster than his hands could steady themselves. People would find out soon enough, but no one would dare follow. He only hoped they wouldn't worry too much. Lyon had studied the map his grandparents left behind, tracing every turn and landmark in his mind. He knew exactly where he was and where he needed to go. If he kept a steady pace, he would reach the gates of Mansville by nightfall. The sun rose in all its golden brilliance, casting a warm glow over the rocky path ahead. He took a deep breath and stepped forward. By early afternoon, Lyon's feet throbbed with each step. He had never walked on such rough terrain before, and his shoes, comfortable for life on the floating mountains, were not built for the jagged ground. He winced as a sharp stone pressed through the thin soles. Still, he clenched his jaw and kept moving. There was no turning back now. Lyon dropped onto a nearby rock, panting. His right shoe was falling apart. Cracked leather, caked in dirt, in a hole near the sole. He hadn't thought to bring a spare. His heel throbbed, a fresh blister forming. With a sigh, he tore strips from an old shirt in his bag, stuffing them inside for extra padding. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. Lyon pulled out his water bottle and took a slow sip, letting the cool liquid ease his parched throat. He sat there a moment longer, gazing at the horizon, the weight of his journey settling in. Were the islanders searching for him yet? Had Booth or Jada noticed his absence? They'd probably be the first to realize he was gone. Just as Lyon imagined, panic had indeed swept through the island. Booth, his best friend, had gone to his house that morning and found the door locked, something Lyon never did. The news spread quickly, drawing a crowd. Some thought he had simply climbed down and would return soon. Others suspected a prank, that he was hiding inside just to stir things up. But a few feared the worst. His departure could bring danger to the floating islands. Yet, no one dared follow. Jada couldn't stop crying. For as long as she could remember, she had imagined the day Lyon would finally confess his undying love for her. She had clung to that hope, convinced it was only a matter of time. But now, he was gone, vanished without a word, leaving her heart heavier than it had ever been. Far below, Lyon, unaware of what was going on, shook off his thoughts and pushed forward. If he wanted to reach Mansville by nightfall, he couldn't afford to stop. Another sharp rock jabbed through his left shoe, making him wince. First stop in Mansville, someone to fix his shoes. Mansville had once been a thriving city, its economy booming and its people prosperous. Even the poorest residents had homes and food on their tables. Work was plentiful, and people took pride in their trades, earning a comfortable living. The city was filled with farms, windmills, and bustling factories, while education was free for every child. Mansville was also famous for its signature chicken dinners, crafted by the finest chefs in the world. The dish became so renowned that tourists flocked to the city just to experience it. Many fell in love with the place and never left, choosing to settle in Mansville instead of returning home. However, since Lord Duke took over, Mansville had become unrecognizable. He seized all the farms, windmills, and factories, hoarding wealth while the people starved. Heavy taxes drained families of their last savings, and schools became a privilege only the children of his officers could afford. The once thriving streets were now lined with beggars, Shops stood abandoned, and hunger ruled the city. Smoke from burning homes curled into the sky, a warning to anyone who dared resist. Inside Mansville, Yogan the cobbler shut the windows to his shop as rain began to pour. The first storm of the season was upon them, and a heavy one at that. He exhaled, watching the streets empty as people hurried for shelter. Business had been slow, but at least he'd made enough today to put food on the table tomorrow. Mansville had become a place where survival was a daily battle. Most people lived hand to mouth, scraping by on whatever they could earn. Yogan was one of the lucky ones. His shop still had customers. Not because they could afford new shoes, but because they had no choice. When your boots were falling apart, you found a way to make them last just a little longer. As Yogan secured the last window, a sudden, forceful knock made him jump. He turned sharply, staring at the door. Who could be out in weather like this? His mind raced through possibilities. No one traveled in such heavy rain unless they had no choice. With a deep breath, he moved toward the door, hesitant but curious. There was a man standing there, carrying a large traveler's bag. His raincoat, soaked through, clung to him as water dripped from the hood that shadowed his face. "Hello, I'm Lyon. I was told at the city gates that you're a cobbler." Yogan hesitated for a moment. Something about the traveler felt off, but he was still standing in the rain. "Yes, I am. Come in." The man stepped inside quickly, shaking off the cold. "Thank you, sir." "Here, let me take your coat and get you a towel," Yogan offered. As Lyon looked up to thank him, his breath caught. Yogan's irises, completely black, seemed to swallow the dim candlelight, making it hard to tell where he was looking. A chill ran down Lyon's spine. Something about those eyes felt unnatural. Other than that, Yogan looked like any other rugged craftsman, broad-shouldered, weathered, and somewhere in his 30s. But those eyes. Lyon's fingers instinctively curled around the strap of his bag. As Lyon shrugged off his soaked coat, Yogan caught a glimpse of his eyes and froze. The stranger met his gaze, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. "What kind of man is this?" Yogan thought. The man looked normal in every way, except for his eyes. They practically shimmered, a circle of many hues surrounding a small black area in the center of the eye, rather than the normal, fully black eyes of men. Instinctively, Yogan took a step back, his gaze narrowing as he studied the stranger more closely. "I am from a land far away," Lyon said softly, watching Yogan's reaction. "The islands of floating mountains. Please, I need your help to fix my shoes." Yogan eyed him warily. "Set them on the table." Lyon placed his shoes down, revealing the gaping holes in their soles. Yogan studied them, then glanced at Lyon, his expression unreadable. After a pause, he finally said, "My name is Yogan." Lyon noticed the suspicion in his voice and chose his words carefully. "It's nice to meet you, Yogan. Thank you for taking a look." Yogan examined the shoes, turning them over in his hands. "I'm afraid there's nothing I can do to fix these," he said, placing them back on the table. "You'll need a new pair. I can make them for you." Lyon let out a deep sigh. He had hoped they could be repaired. "How long would that take?" "A day's work," Yogan replied. 2 copper coins." Lyon's eyes widened. 2 copper coins? Back home, he would give a child 10 just for candy. He was slightly confused, but pressed on. Yes, please. Go ahead. Just then, the door hiding in the back corner of the shop swung open, and a tall, chubby woman in a dark brown cloak stepped inside, a wooden spoon in hand.
Yogan, dinner is...
She stopped when she saw Lyon, her eyes widening before she quickly recovered.
Well, who do we have here?
She smiled, bright white teeth contrasting with her dark eyes. She turned to Yogan.
Did you really leave our guest dripping wet?
Yogan started, but before he could answer, she strode over and extended a hand.
I'm Bella, Yogan's wife. Welcome.
Lyon shook her hand. I'm Lyon, from the islands of floating mountains.
Really?
Bella's eyes widened as she exchanged a glance with Yogan.
Well, you'll have to stay for dinner and tell us more.
She said, then paused.
Wait, do you have a place to stay?
Not yet, Lyon admitted. I was considering an inn on the north side.
Oh, nonsense. A night there cost a man's wages for a year. You'll stay with us.
Lyon hesitated but nodded. He suspected he could easily afford the inn, but Bella left no room for argument. Thank you, he said simply.
Wonderful.
She clapped her hands and quickly fetched dry clothes and a towel, then led him to the main house. Lyon changed into the plain brown tunic and pantalon she provided, grateful to be warm and dry. She led Lyon into the living room, a small but inviting space. 4 wicker chairs faced each other, each piled with colorful pillows. A warm glow from the fireplace flickered against the wooden walls, making the room feel even cozier. Bella gestured for him to sit, and he sank into one of the chairs, still trying to process how he had ended up here, in a stranger's home in Mansville. Yogan was still out in the shop, and Lyon couldn't help but wonder what the man truly thought of him.
And this is our precious little Jane.
Bella entered, cradling a tiny bundle wrapped in soft swaddling cloth. Lyon stood as she approached, his eyes drawn to the baby. He had never seen anything so delicate, so perfect.
She's 3 weeks old,
Bella cooed, tickling Jane's belly. The baby let out a tiny smile before blinking open her eyes. Lyon inhaled sharply. Her eyes, he gasped. Bella chuckled.
They look just like yours.
Leon's mind raced. Was this normal? Did they know what this meant? Did he? For the first time in a long time, Lyon found himself at a loss for words. Bella gently placed Jane into Leon's arms while she set the table for dinner. He hesitated, surprised by how easily she trusted him. The tiny bundle felt impossibly light, her warmth seeping into his hands. Jane, he thought, gazing at her delicate features. Such a beautiful name for an innocent child. Lyon remained standing, gently rocking her back and forth until her tiny eyelids fluttered shut. A strange sense of peace settled over him as he held her close. Just then, Yogan walked in and eyed Lyon when he saw him with the baby. He said nothing, but joined his wife in setting the table. Bella took off her brown coat, now that the warmth of the living room made it unnecessary, and carried Jane into the other room once the food was ready. The 3 adults sat down together at the table. A candle in the center flickered softly, casting a warm glow around them. So, Lyon, tell us about the islands of floating mountains. Yogan didn't trust Lyon, but he couldn't ignore the unsettling truth. His daughter had the same eyes. No, he told himself, there are no people beyond Mansville. That's what Lord Duke always said. People who believed otherwise disappeared. Still, Lyon was different. His clothes, his speech, even his ruined shoes hinted at wealth. He wasn't lying about being from somewhere else. I was born on an island, Lyon said, 2 days south beyond the mountains of Askaya.
There's nothing beyond those mountains,
Yogan snapped.
Yogan,
Bella's voice was firm.
that can't finish.
But there is. Here, I'll show you, Lyon said, pulling out a damp map and spreading it on the table. He pointed past the mountains. Yogan's eyes narrowed. The man had brought out a mostly empty piece of paper, centered on what looked to be an oddly small map of the area around Mansville, and was now pointing at a blank space.
Where? There's nothing there.
Lyon tapped the spot again. Right here, my island. Bella leaned in, studying the map.
You just don't see it.
She whispered. Yogan clenched his jaw. Could Lord Duke have blinded them to the truth? The mountains were there, yet beyond them, only emptiness.
But that doesn't mean it isn't real.
Bella added. Tears began to stream down Bella's face.
I want to believe there's a better life out there for my child, but I just can't see it.
Yogan placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, his expression heavy with sorrow. He turned back to Lyon, exhaling deeply.
We've suffered under Lord Duke's rule for so long. Many have died just for questioning him. He says there's nothing beyond Mansville, that anyone who claims otherwise is a traitor.
He hesitated, his voice quieter now.
We believed it until...
Bella wiped her tears and continued.
My grandfather, he passed a few months before Jane was born. On his deathbed, he told us there was life beyond Mansville. And he begged us to keep Jane safe from the Macquarie christening.
Lyon frowned. He had read through his grandparents' books countless times, yet he had never come across anything about a Macquarie christening. What is the Macquarie christening? He asked.
When a child is born, Yogan said, it is law that they must be taken immediately to Lord Duke's temple for the christening. The temple women take the child into a chamber. No one knows what happens inside. Afterward, the child is returned to the parents, and life goes on.
Leon's brows furrowed. But you didn't take Jane, did you? Bella and Yogan exchanged a look.
No.
Bella admitted, her voice barely above a whisper.
And to our shock, when she opened her eyes 2 days later, they were different, like yours. Many colors.
She gestured toward Leon's eyes.
That's when we knew Grandpa was right. Something is wrong. There's more to this world than Mansville. A better life beyond it.
Nobody knows Bella has given birth,
Yogan whispered.
They think she's just sick. If they find out we skipped the christening, we're dead.
He sighed deeply.
We know we need to leave, but we have nowhere to go.
Leon's chest tightened. He glanced between them, then leaned in. You're right. You have to leave. You can come with me to the floating mountains. Bella tensed. Yogan exhaled, shaking his head. They had considered escape before, but believing in another world felt impossible.
How do we know it's real?
Yogan asked at last. Bella stayed silent, eyes downcast. A tear slipped down her cheek.
Am I not proof enough?
Lyon pressed. Besides, what other choice do you have? Yogan let out a heavy sigh. Lyon was right. If they stayed, it was only a matter of time before they were discovered. But leaving meant trusting this stranger and believing in something they had never seen. He glanced at the map again, the blankness of the page taunting him. A place they had not only never seen, but couldn't even find. Bella wiped her tears and met Yogan's gaze.
We have to do this for Jane.
Her voice was steady, but her eyes held a plea. Yogan hesitated, then slowly nodded. That night, the three of them mapped out their escape. They would leave under the cover of darkness the next evening. Yogan knew of a hidden way out, a path he and his childhood friend Ragul had discovered long ago and never spoken of. The thought of leaving without telling Ragul weighed on him, but the risk was too great. Even with a solid plan, neither Bella nor Yogan found sleep that night. At the first light of dawn, Bella knelt on the wooden floor, tying up a small bundle of essentials. They could only take what was necessary. Everything else would have to be left behind. The dim glow of a candle flickered in the corner, casting soft shadows across the room. Yogan decided to open his shop as usual to avoid suspicion. His hands worked steadily, crafting a final pair of shoes for Lyon, a parting gift for the journey ahead. Meanwhile, Lyon stayed back, caring for Jane, rocking her gently in his arms. He hadn't expected to enjoy it so much, but as she cooed softly, a strange warmth filled his chest. Bella exhaled, tightening the knot on the sack. There was no turning back now. As Yogan prepared to close his shop, he heard footsteps outside. He glanced through the window and saw a familiar silhouette, Ragul, his closest friend since childhood. Their mothers had been traders in the market, and they had always been like brothers. Normally, Yogan would welcome him gladly, but not tonight. His heart pounded. Had Ragul heard something? Had someone seen Bella or Jane? He swallowed hard, gripping the door handle. If Ragul knew, what would he do?
Hello, Yogan.
Raoul's deep baritone filled the shop, the kind of voice that made even his own children shrink. Yogan forced a smile.
Ragul, how are you? Busy day?
Oh, you know, administration work.
Ragul said, lowering himself into the chair Yogan reserved for customers. He leaned back as if he owned the place.
A lot of rebellious youth in town. Just today, we arrested 4 teenagers for speaking against the king.
Yogan tensed but kept his expression neutral.
That's so.
Ragul was a strict enforcer of Lord Duke's rule. As the prison caretaker, he ensured order, often through fear.
You wouldn't believe the trouble today,
he muttered.
Had to teach a few prisoners a lesson.
Yogan stayed silent, his hands tightening on the counter. He had heard these stories before, but tonight they unsettled him more than ever. Ragul eyed him.
You're quiet.
Just a long day,
Yogan said, forcing a smile. Ragul studied him for a moment before nodding.
Is everything all right, Yogan? Is Bella still unwell?
And she's had better days,
Yogan replied. It was true, just not in the way Ragul assumed.
I'm sorry to hear that. My wife will bring some herbs tomorrow. They might help.
Thank you, my friend. I'm closing early to take care of her.
Good. I'll check in tomorrow.
Ragul stood, but his eyes landed on an unusual pair of shoes on Yogan's work table. His expression darkened.
Those shoes look different from anything I've ever seen,
Ragul said, tilting his head to examine them under the dim candlelight.
You'd be surprised what people bring in these days,
Yogan replied, keeping his tone casual, hoping to deflect further curiosity.
Interesting.
Ragul lingered for a moment before finally turning to leave.
Thanks again, Ragul. Yogan forced a smile, watching his friend step outside. The moment the door shut behind him, Yogan locked it and hurried back into the house. Are we ready? Yogan whispered. He and Bella had gathered everything they needed and placed it in the living room. Jane was securely wrapped against Bella's back, hidden beneath her cape. From the outside, no one would suspect a thing. Yogan reached for his travel pack, but just as his fingers brushed the straps, a sudden noise froze him in place. Yogan pressed a finger to his lips, signaling for silence. The three of them exchanged uneasy glances. They had all heard it, rustling leaves just outside the window, the unmistakable crunch of footsteps on dry ground. Yogan's eyes darted toward the door, his jaw tightening. Someone is listening. He mouthed the words, barely moving his lips. For a long, tense moment, no one moved. The only sound was their own breathing, shallow and controlled. Then, slowly, the rustling faded, footsteps retreating into the night. Yogan exhaled sharply. We have to leave, now! By the time they reached the outskirts of Mansville, the night had deepened, and beneath the light of the moon, the shadows stretched long beneath the trees. They slipped silently into the cover of the forest, hearts pounding with the weight of their escape. Jane had not cried or stirred, an unusual stillness for a child her age, as if she understood the danger. Miraculously, they had passed through the city unnoticed. Lyon exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They journeyed on uneventfully until they reached the base of the Escaya Mountains, Lyon leading the way. His steps were steady, his mind weighed with the reality of what they had left behind. He glanced at Yogan and Bella, their faces etched with exhaustion, but determined. Lyon exhaled, pulling his cloak tighter against the chill. His new shoes, sturdy yet comfortable, carried him forward with ease. He had no doubt Yogan and Bella would find his place on the floating islands. If this was the only reason he had been sent to Mansville, then it was enough. Bella clutched Jane tightly, her heart pounding. She had never traveled beyond Mansville, never even knew there was somewhere beyond it. And now she was risking everything, her home, her life, her child, for the unknown. Yogan trailed behind, scanning the rocky terrain. If Ragul had even the slightest suspicion, they were already in danger. He just had to trust that Lyon was telling the truth. As they climbed higher, the wind grew colder. Jane whimpered, then let out a sharp cry.
She's hungry,
Bella said.
I need to stop to feed her.
Lyon nodded. We'll rest in that cave, he said, pointing to a hollow beneath a large rock. It'll keep us hidden. Bella exhaled in relief and hurried toward the shelter, hoping Jane would stay quiet. They stepped into the cave, grateful for the shelter it provided. The rocky walls felt sturdy, offering a sense of safety they hadn't had since leaving Mansville. After nursing, Jane drifted into a peaceful sleep, her tiny breath steady against Bella's chest. They decided to rest there for the remainder of the night and resume their journey at first light. It was safer than traveling in the dark. Yogan settled near the entrance, gripping his staff as his eyes scanned the path behind them, his mind still restless. Lyon, unable to sit still, slipped out moments later to scout the area, ensuring they weren't being followed. Lyon stepped out cautiously, but voices stopped him. Peering over a rock, he saw several armed men with torches, one in a black turban, the others gripping knives. His stomach tightened. He crept back inside. There are men outside. I think they're looking for us. Bella clutched Jane, fear flashing in her eyes. One of them is Ragul, Yogan muttered. I bet he was the one eavesdropping last night. Lyon tensed. Ragul? The prison caretaker, and an old friend. Lyon exhaled. We can't move now. It's too risky. Bella nodded.
Then we stay.
The cave suddenly felt much smaller. Throughout the rest of the night, Yogan and Lyon took turns keeping watch. They kept all the lights off and dared not make a fire, fearing it would draw attention. Cold wind howled through the cave, sending shivers down Bella's spine. She wrapped Jane in every blanket they had, cradling her tightly. Though Bella closed her eyes, sleep never came. Her mind raced with dark possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. She listened to the wind, to the distant sounds beyond the cave, and to the steady breathing of her child, clinging to that one fragile sense of peace. Early the next morning, Bella jolted to the sound of approaching footsteps from outside the cave. Lyon and Yogan stood at the cave entrance, each gripping a large branch as a makeshift weapon.
They found us!
Bella's breath hitched as she clutched Jane tightly.
They're going to kill us!
Tears welled in her eyes. The morning light filtering into the cave dimmed as two shadowed figures stepped into view. Bella squinted, her heart pounding. Jetta? Booth? Leon's eyes widened as he embraced them. "We thought you were Mansville soldiers," he said.
We saw armed men,
Jetta explained.
but when they looked at us, they fled. No idea why.
Booth nodded.
We guessed they were searching the caves, so we checked too.
Lyon exhaled.
I can't believe you came after me.
Jetta smiled.
Of course we did.
Grateful, Lyon gestured to Bella and Yogan.
Come, meet my friends.
All five continued through the mountains of Askaya. Lyon filled them in on everything. When they reached the final hill, they stopped. Below them, floating above the mist, were the legendary islands. They had made it. Lyon gazed into the clouds, his heart pounding as he saw his home, still floating exactly where he had left it. The little house on the rocky island, it looked untouched by time, a safe haven in the sky.
We're here,
he announced, his voice filled with quiet relief. Yogan and Bella exchanged uneasy glances. Bella tightened her hold on Jane, her eyes scanning the horizon.
We don't see anything.
She whispered.
All we see is an open sky and nothing else.
Lyon turned to them, confusion flickering across his face.
You really don't see it?
Yogan shook his head.
Lyon, are you sure?
Leon's chest tightened. Of course he was sure. But if they couldn't see it, how would they ever reach it? Just then, Jane let out a soft giggle, her wide, shimmering eyes fixed on the sky above. She was smiling, reaching out as if trying to grasp something unseen.
She can see it.
Bella whispered in awe. Lyon turned to Bella and Yogan, his expression calm but firm.
You have to believe. Forget what you were told. Forget the doubts. Open your heart to it.
Bella clenched her eyes shut.
I believe.
She murmured. When she opened them again, her breath caught. Something had changed. Her eyes were no longer black. They shimmered with shifting colors, just like Leon's, just like Jane's.
I see it.
Bella gasped, clutching her chest.
Oh, it's so beautiful.
Tears streamed down her face as she took in the floating islands, the waterfalls, the golden light illuminating the sky. It had been there all along, hidden from those who could not believe. She turned to Yogan, breathless, waiting for him to see it too.
Yogan,
Lyon said, stepping closer.
do you see it?
Yogan's jaw tightened. He scanned the sky, willing himself to believe, but there was nothing. Only emptiness where the floating mountains should be.
I can't see,
He muttered, frustration boiling inside him.
His fist clenched, and with a sharp exhale, he kicked a loose stone, sending it tumbling down the slope. Why could he not believe? Why was he the only one left in the dark?
Yogan,
Jetta stepped forward, her voice gentle yet firm.
I know you've been told lies your whole life. I know it's hard to trust in something you can't see, but you can do this. Let go of the doubts, the pain, the fear. Believe that there's more, something better waiting for you.
Yogan took a deep breath, his fist clenching at his sides. Then slowly he closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, everything changed. Yogan gasped, his breath hitching as a rush of warmth spread through him. His vision blurred, then sharpened. Colors more vivid than he had ever known flooded his sight. The floating mountains, the golden sky, the cascading waterfalls. They were real. They had always been real. I can see, he whispered, his voice trembling with awe. He staggered back, overwhelmed, his chest rising and falling as emotion surged through him. A lifetime of doubt crumbled in an instant. Tears welled in his eyes as he turned to Bella, to Lyon, to Jetta. I was blind, but now I see. With Jane finally inside, Yogan and Bella sat together on the steps of their home, watching the floating islands drift under the golden sky. For the first time, they could just breathe. Bella leaned against him.
Can you believe this is ours?
Yogan looked out at the endless horizon, a slow smile forming. I can now. No more fear, no more running, just the quiet beauty of a life they never thought possible. As the sky darkened, they sat in silence, hands intertwined, knowing they had finally found home. The end.